Now I want to talk about what's called the preprocessor directives. And so remember earlier when we were looking at code, I told you not to worry about this pound include line earlier. So now we want to actually figure out what that is. So this pound include is basically a preprocessor directive. So let me get into the notes, and we're going to go over what a preprocessor is and then what the preprocessor directive is. But I wanted to show you where it is in the code first so you know what I'm talking about as we go through the notes. So first of all, before we talk about the preprocessor directive, let's just talk about, well, what is this thing called the preprocessor? So the preprocessor is a program that processes source code before the compiler sees it. So when we compile our program, the compile is actually a few steps. So before the program actually gets to the compiler, it goes through what's called the preprocessor. So the preprocessor is a program that processes source code. So the source code is our .cpp file. So source code before the compiler sees it. And so this preprocessor does a few things. First of all, it strips out all of the comments. So remember how we had things in our code that had the 2 forward slashes, and then we had like some comments, so that basically it was just saying what the code does. So one thing the preprocessor does is it strips out all comments. So this is why we can have comments in our source code and it'll still compile, because they're taken out before the compiler gets your code. And after these comments are stripped out, the preprocessor replaces each comment with a single space. So replaces each comment with a single space. And then what the preprocessor does is that after it strips out the comments, is it executes these preprocessor directives. So the preprocessor directives are lines of code that start with this pound, or I guess hash nowadays. But anyway, so the most common, like the one that we're going to see in this class, is the pound include, and then there's going to be some file name in here. The example that we just looked at has IOStream in there. And there's a few other preprocessor directives, so others that you'll see are if and def or define. So don't worry about these right now, but these are preprocessor directives too. So basically anything that has a pound in front of it is a preprocessor directive. And so what this does is this replaces, so this is the name of a header file. This header file includes code that someone else wrote. And so what the preprocessor does is it takes this file and it inserts the code from that file into the top of your source code. Basically, you can use files that either maybe you wrote a file that you didn't want to include in every single source code, or you want to use a file that someone else wrote, like this IOStream file. So this preprocessor is just going to take that file and it's going to paste all of the contents of that file into the top of your source code. And specifically, the IOStream is for the input-output streams. So so you'll see later that you're going to be able to read data into your program. You're going to be able to print things out to the console. So basically, the preprocessor doesn't understand C++. All it does is it gets the source code ready for the compiler. So I'm just going to say that the preprocessor doesn't understand C++. It just gets the source code, so your CPP file, ready for the compiler. And then it's the compiler that understands C++.